The antique scepter was a lie, a distraction for a crime I didn't understand, but the real target wasn't a building or a ledger. It was the only person I trusted, and they just confirmed she's been silenced. The fluorescent lights of the interview room hummed, a sound that seemed to amplify the frantic drumming in my chest. It was cold, sterile, the kind of gray that leaches the color out of everything, including hope. I stared at the chipped formica table separating me from Detective Harding, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite during a particularly bad storm. "Mr. Vance," Harding began, his voice flat, devoid of inflection, which somehow made it worse than shouting. "We've been over this. The robbery at the Sterling Museum of Antiquities, last Tuesday, between 2:15 a.m. and 3:45 a.m. The security tapes show a figure matching your approximate build entering the restricted wing. They made off with the scepter of Antioch, a piece valued, conservatively, in the 9 figures. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to remember every detail of the alibi I'd rehearsed, until my lawyer threatened to charge me extra for the vocal cord strain. "Detective, I keep telling you, I was home, asleep. My fiancée, Clara, can confirm it. We had a late dinner. I was in bed by 1 a.m. I woke up when my alarm went off at 7 a.m. Harding leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He smelled faintly of stale coffee and something metallic, perhaps the precinct itself. "Clara's statement is inconsistent. She says you were there, yes, but she also mentioned you took a phone call around 1:45 a.m., said you seemed agitated, left the room for about 20 minutes, and then came back extremely quiet. She assumed it was work trouble." My blood went cold. The phone call. That was the weak link I hadn't accounted for. It wasn't work. It was Marcus. Marcus, who swore this entire operation was clean, untraceable, an investment opportunity. Marcus, who had disappeared off the face of the earth the moment the news broke about the scepter. That was a personal matter, I managed, my throat suddenly dry. A relative was ill. I stepped out to the balcony to discuss it privately so Clara wouldn't worry. Harding steepled his fingers, his eyes never leaving mine. They were the color of muddy water. A relative. Convenient. Because the call, Mr. Vance, originated from a burner phone, registered to a prepaid card purchased 3 blocks from the Sterling Museum 48 hours before the theft. A theft that required intimate knowledge of the museum's antiquated motion sensor system, knowledge you happen to possess, given your previous consultancy work there 5 years ago. The air in the room seemed to thicken, suffocating me. They hadn't just found a resemblance on grainy footage. They had built a meticulous timeline around me, brick by damning brick. I consulted for them once. That was years ago. They hired me to review their environmental controls, not their alarm schematics. I haven't set foot near that building since 2019, I argued, pushing back from the table, the metal chair scraping loudly against the tile floor. I knew I looked desperate, but the alternative, a lifetime looking at the inside of a concrete box because of some elaborate frame-up, was worse. Harding let my outburst hang in the air for a moment before producing a photograph from a manila folder. It wasn't the security footage. It was a high-resolution shot taken from a traffic camera across the street from the museum's rarely used rear service entrance. "This is what we found when we traced the vehicle registered to your corporate lease. Black sedan, parked exactly where the thieves staged their getaway vehicle, right before the alarm was triggered. The timestamp is 2:02 a.m. That's 13 minutes after your supposed balcony conversation ended. And look closely at the passenger window reflection." He slid the photo toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs with the rhythm of a trapped bird. I squinted at the blurred reflection. It was distorted, wavy due to the angle, but unmistakable. Reflected in the glass, above the roofline of the sedan, was the distinctive, angular silhouette of the Sterling Museum's gargoyle statues lining the roof edge. And superimposed over that, impossibly, clearly, was the faint, unmistakable outline of a man leaning into the driver's side, adjusting something. The man's profile, even blurry, even distorted by the reflection, was mine. My jawline, my hairline. "We've isolated the image through enhancement software, Mr. Vance," Harding said softly, leaning back again, a predator satisfied that the trap had sprung. "It's you. You weren't at home discussing a relative's illness. You were at the museum, orchestrating the removal of a priceless artifact. The question now isn't if you did it, but why you involved Clara by lying to protect an accomplice who clearly ditched you." I stared at the photo, my reality shattering like brittle glass. The logic was flawless from their perspective. Marcus hadn't just framed me. He'd used the one thing I valued most, my relationship with Clara, as the perfect smokescreen for the time window I was supposedly unavailable. I didn't know how Marcus had pulled this off, how he'd cloned my silhouette, or why he'd gone to such lengths, but the evidence screamed my guilt. I had no defense left against the technical certainty of that reflection. "I didn't touch that scepter," I whispered, though the words felt weak, pathetic. Harding sighed, tapping a pen against the folder containing the evidence. "We're done here for now. We're charging you with felony theft and conspiracy to defraud. We're holding you pending a formal arraignment. You can discuss the details of your impending sentence with your public defender." He stood up, towering over me. "Don't try to contact Ms. Hayes. She's also under review for obstruction." As the heavy steel door clanged shut behind the detective, locking me in the gray silence, I realized the depth of the pit Marcus had dug for me. The initial shock of the fabricated evidence wore off, replaced by a terrifying clarity. Marcus hadn't just framed me. He'd disappeared with the artifact and left me holding the bag, a bag stuffed with enough circumstantial evidence to guarantee a massive sentence. I closed my eyes, trying to conjure up the image of the reflection again, trying to find the flaw in the digital composite that proved it wasn't me. But then a new, colder thought sliced through the panic. If Marcus had gone to this much trouble, acquiring burner phones, planting vehicles, arranging photographic evidence at the exact time of the heist, it meant he didn't just want the scepter. He wanted me gone, permanently sidelined. And if he was willing to risk a ciężkie obwinienie against an associate for a simple jewel heist, what else was he capable of? And who else was involved in this organized scheme? I had to find Marcus before the prosecution pinned the obwinienie po osobę dzieckiem on me for something far worse than theft, because I suddenly had a terrible feeling that the scepter was just a distraction for the real crime. And the person who could prove my innocence, the only person who could tell the police what Marcus was really after, was Clara, who was now sitting in a different, equally cold room, being questioned about my supposed movements and potentially being coerced into betraying me. I slammed my fist silently against the table, the need to get out becoming an agonizing physical ache. If I didn't escape soon, I wouldn't just be facing dziesiątki lat. I'd be facing the consequences of whatever truly motivated Marcus. A consequence I knew, deep in my gut, was deadly. The hours that followed were a blur of stale air and the dull thud of the clock ticking towards an unknown future. I sat numbly in the holding cell, the reality of the situation solidifying into a lead weight in my stomach. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me. He'd engineered a near-perfect narrative of my guilt, exploiting every minor eccentricity in my life, my prior employment, my brief balcony chat with Clara, and twisting it into incriminating facts. When the public defender, a perpetually exhausted woman named Ms. Chen, finally arrived, she looked at the evidence file with a grim resignation that chilled me more than the cell's temperature. "Vance," she said, flipping through glossy printouts of the traffic camera image, "the state has a rock-solid case based on what they've presented so far. The proximity of the burner phone purchase, the vehicle link, and this reflective image. They're presenting this as a lone wolf operation gone wrong, not a frame-up. They believe you hired some disposable element to drive the getaway car, and that's why you were on the balcony, coordinating the handoff. It wasn't me in that reflection, Chen. It was too clean, too easy. Who has the resources to fabricate photographic evidence like that? I hissed, leaning toward the thick glass partition separating us. Chen sighed, rubbing her temples. That's what we need to prove. But right now, proving a sophisticated digital conspiracy against the police department's own experts is an uphill battle, especially when your supposed accomplice, Marcus, is MIA. Did he take anything else? Did he mention anything that seemed out of place recently? I racked my brain. Marcus had been overly enthusiastic about this investment. He'd kept referring to the scepter not as a collectible, but as a key. A key to what? He mentioned needing a secure transfer point once we liquidated the assets, I recalled. The memory sharp now, untainted by panic. He said the buyer didn't trust banks. He insisted everything had to be moved through a specific overseas holding company he controlled. He never named the company, just kept saying, once this goes through, we never look back. A holding company, Chen muttered, scribbling furiously. That points toward large-scale money laundering, Vance. That's where the tяжкое обвинение escalates from simple theft. If they can connect the scepter to funding anything worse than art fraud, say illicit arms dealing or large-scale destabilization efforts, your odds plummet. This wasn't just about getting rich. This was high-stakes movement of capital. My fear spiked again. Marcus wasn't a simple thief. He was a highly organized operator moving beyond simple theft into something far more dangerous. This explained the intense focus on framing me so completely, to make me disappear before I could ask too many questions about the true cargo. What about Clara? Is she still detained? She's being held separately, but yes, and this is the critical issue. When they questioned her about your balcony call, she eventually cracked under the pressure. She confirmed you were agitated, and she admitted that when you returned, you were carrying something small, wrapped in a cloth napkin, which you immediately hid in your study desk. My stomach dropped out. The napkin. I had forgotten the napkin. When Marcus had rushed over that night, panicked after the phone call, he hadn't just needed an alibi. He'd needed me to temporarily hold something physical until he could secure the main hall. I had been so focused on the scepter theft story that I'd forgotten the brief, furtive handoff just before the alarm was even triggered. What was in the napkin? Chen pressed, her voice urgent. I racked my memory, picturing the quick, desperate movement under the dim light of the hallway. It wasn't jewelry. It was too dense, too angular. It was a small metal cylinder, I whispered, the description finally emerging. Heavy, maybe 4 inches long. Marcus shoved it into my hand and told me to lock it away and not look. He said it was insurance. I panicked after he left, and I tossed it into the back of my junk drawer in the study. I never saw it again because when the police swept my house, they were focused entirely on electronics and financial records. A cylinder, Chen repeated slowly. Did you tell the officers about the cylinder? No, I couldn't remember it until just now. I was too busy denying I was at the museum. Chen stood up abruptly, pacing the small confines of the visiting area. Vance, the museum staff reported only one item stolen, the scepter. If there was a second item, something small, metal, and vital enough for Marcus to risk an in-person drop-off just before the heist, then the theft of the scepter was the distraction. She stopped pacing, her eyes wide with dawning horror. They weren't after the scepter for its monetary value alone. They needed a high-profile theft to draw all internal security and media focus away from what was actually taken. They needed a crisis that screamed art crime while they were securing something else. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into a terrifying mosaic. Marcus had used my expertise to study the museum's security flaws, not just the alarm system. The antique environmentals, the temperature, humidity controls, I had consulted on those. If the cylinder contained something volatile, something that required precise environmental conditions, then the museum itself was the target for a reason beyond the scepter. Chen, the cylinder, I insisted, my voice breaking with urgency. It has to be related to the environmental systems. Maybe something highly sensitive or chemical? Something that could be smuggled in using the museum's systems as cover. Before Chen could respond, the cell door slid open again, but this time it wasn't the public defender leaving. 2 uniformed officers entered, flanking a senior investigator from the Internal Review Board, the people who handled the more sensitive aspects of security breaches, the ones who dealt with potential sabotage related to state assets, not just simple theft. The senior investigator, a severe-looking woman named Agent Davies, didn't even look at me. She looked straight at Ms. Chen. Ms. Chen, you are advised to cease counsel immediately. Mr. Vance is being transferred. He is no longer being held on charges related to artifact theft. He is now a person of interest in a matter of national security. Davies stepped toward me, her expression chillingly neutral. Mr. Vance, we have reason to believe that the item Marcus left with you was not just insurance, but a component necessary for activating a larger mechanism within the Sterling facility. We believe you were aware of the true nature of the operation. We are no longer interested in the scepter. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We are interested in the dormant dispersal unit planted inside the museum's primary air filtration manifold. The unit that requires precise chemical activation, the activation cylinder, Vance. Where is it? Agent Davies' words hung in the recycled air of the holding cell like a death sentence. Dispersal unit, manifold, activation cylinder. This wasn't a high-stakes robbery anymore. This was sabotage, potentially involving something catastrophic, disguised as an art heist. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the image of the relatively minor crime, the theft of a glittering antiquity, with the horrifying implication of a hidden chemical weapon or contaminant. I swear to you, Agent Davies, I don't know anything about a dispersal unit, I pleaded, my voice rising in genuine terror. Marcus only told me the cylinder was insurance. That's all. I hid it because he terrified me, not because I was planning an attack. Davies merely gave a slight, dismissive nod to the uniformed officers. Take him. We're moving him to the secure wing for a full debriefing. Ms. Chen, looking pale and utterly defeated, was gently ushered out by one of the officers. As the door hissed shut behind her, sealing me off from any semblance of civilian legal aid, I felt the last thread of my external support snap. I was now entirely in the hands of people who believed I was either a willing conspirator or, at best, a dangerously incompetent pawn in something far larger than Marcus's greed. The transfer was rougher this time. I was cuffed tighter, blindfolded, and moved through a maze of corridors that smelled of concrete and ozone. Definitely not the main precinct anymore. When the blindfold finally came off, I found myself in a room starkly different from the first interview suite. It was soundproofed, equipped with surveillance cameras that weren't subtly hidden, but overtly mounted in every corner. Davies was waiting, this time with a dossier that looked far thicker than the previous one. She placed a single, clear evidence bag on the table. Inside was the object I had dimly recalled seeing in the napkin, the metal cylinder. It was dark, matte black, about 4 inches long, with faint, almost invisible etching patterns running along its circumference. "We found it, Mr. Vance," Davies stated, tapping the bag. "Your housekeeper, bless her soul, remembered you tossing a small metal object into the bottom of your antique office desk, the one you claimed was too heavy to move during the initial search. Forensics retrieved it an hour ago. It's keyed specifically to the environmental control panel you designed 5 years ago. If you hadn't alerted us with your vague mention of a cylinder, it might have remained inert, or worse, activated prematurely." "Activated how?" I demanded, leaning forward, trying to see if I could recognize any of the faint markings on the casing. "That's what we need to know from you," Davies said, her voice dropping to a dangerous conspiratorial low. "We believe the scepter theft was designed to pull attention while Marcus, or whoever sent him, prepped a system for a wide-scale dispersal event. We suspect the goal was to incapacitate a critical government or financial district sector simultaneously using a highly specialized, untraceable agent. The question is, what agent needed this specific key? And who is the buyer who wanted the target paralyzed but not destroyed? She flipped open the dossier to a page showing a grainy security photo. It wasn't from the museum. It was from a high-end private airfield outside the city, taken 3 days after the heist. The photo showed Marcus, not looking panicked or on the run, but calmly boarding a sleek, unmarked corporate jet. Beside him stood another man, a man whose face made my blood turn to ice. It was Senator Alistair Thorne, head of the Appropriations Committee, the man who had personally overseen the security budget approval for the Sterling Museum just last year. "Senator Thorne," Davies murmured, watching my reaction closely. He disappeared from public view the day after the heist. We suspect he chartered this jet. He's the one who signed off on the security upgrade contract that you, Vance, consulted on. He also has deep, undisclosed ties to several defense contractors who have recently been flagged for suspicious offshore transfers. My world tilted. This wasn't about a stolen antique or simple profit. This was political sabotage, high treason, potentially the crippling of a major financial hub, and I had been the unwitting mule carrying the ignition switch. Marcus was the operative, Thorne was the mastermind, and I was the patsy. "I've never met Senator Thorne outside of a public function," I stammered, shaking my head violently. "I only knew Marcus socially. He approached me months ago, asking about the old systems at the museum, but I told him the schematics were proprietary and locked down." Davies ignored my protestations. "The cylinder is inert right now, but it won't be for long. We've placed a trace on it, but the signal is fading. We have perhaps 48 hours before the active chemical components degrade or, conversely, reach optimal readiness for deployment. If Thorne and Marcus initiate the dispersal sequence remotely, the area surrounding the Sterling Museum, which includes the Federal Reserve Annex and 3 major data centers, will be effectively locked down for weeks, possibly months, depending on the agent used." She leaned in so close I could feel her breath. "We need Marcus, Vance, and we need to know how Thorne manipulated you into holding the key. If you cooperate fully, if you can give us the location of Marcus or the specific activation protocol he shared with you, which we believe he disguised as jargon about environmental stability, we might be able to reduce the severity of your charge from an accomplice in state sabotage to accessory after the fact for theft. But you have to move now." Just as I opened my mouth to agree, to beg for a chance to talk to Clara one last time before diving into this abyss, the emergency lights in the chamber flashed a deep, sickening crimson. A synthesized voice echoed through the hidden speakers. "Attention! Trace signal on evidence item Delta 7 has been triangulated. Location, Sector 4, Abandoned Industrial Zone B. Time to lock on, 0. Davies snatched the evidence bag containing the cylinder, her composure finally fracturing. "Damn it! He knew we'd trace it the moment we brought it in. He's moving the launch site." She pointed a finger directly at my face. "Vance, you just bought yourself some time because now you're coming with me. If that dispersal unit is moving, Marcus is there. And if Marcus is there, we might just catch him before he triggers whatever nightmare Thorne cooked up. Get him prepped for immediate transport. Tell the director we need full tactical support at Sector 4 now." The controlled chaos that erupted in the secure facility was deafening. Sirens wailed, guttural commands echoed from unseen radios, and the sterile quiet of the holding wing was instantly replaced by the frantic energy of a department shifting into maximum alert. My brief respite of psychological clarity was shattered by the immediate, terrifying reality of being thrown into an active pursuit. Agent Davies, her face grim and set, grabbed my arm, pulling me roughly toward the exit hatch. "You're coming as leverage, Vance. You're the last known contact. If Marcus sees you, he might hesitate or he might talk. Either way, you're our bait." We were hustled into an unmarked reinforced vehicle, the ride characterized by aggressive acceleration and the constant chatter of tactical radios discussing the coordinates. Abandoned Industrial Zone B. A derelict graveyard of rusted machinery and forgotten warehouses, the perfect staging ground for a large-scale operation designed to evade easy detection. Why wouldn't they just use the museum? Why move the activation site now? I shouted over the rumble of the engine, clutching the edge of the seat. Davies, sitting beside me monitoring the GPS tracker on the cylinder, now nestled in a specialized shock-proof case in the center console, didn't look up. Because they realized we found the cylinder too quickly. Thorne needed a controlled environment for activation, likely one with specific atmospheric pressure or shielding capabilities that the museum's public-facing systems couldn't guarantee. The industrial zone has old, deep bunkers. They're probably setting up a controlled chamber for the dispersal sequence. The drive was agonizingly short, cutting through back roads and empty lots until we reached the perimeter of Zone B. It was desolate, moonlit, and silent, the kind of silence that screams danger. We parked a half-mile from the last confirmed signal ping, dismounting with a squad of heavily armed tactical officers who moved with practiced, terrifying efficiency. Davies handed me a heavy, dark jacket. "Put this on. You're on point with me. If Marcus engages, you shout his name. Don't be a hero, Vance. Just talk." As we moved through the skeletal remains of massive factory buildings, the air grew thick with the smell of ozone and damp metal. The tactical team swept the first few structures, finding nothing but echoes. The tracker led us deeper, toward a cluster of interconnected warehouses that looked like they hadn't been used since the Cold War. "Signal strength increasing," Davies murmured into her comms. "We're close. Prepare for entry." We breached the main warehouse doors, not with a bang, but with specialized hydraulic cutters that made a surprisingly quiet whining sound before the heavy metal groaned inward. Inside, the vast space was dark, illuminated only by the beams of our tactical flashlights. And then we saw it. In the center of the floor, bathed in the eerie glow of work lights, was a makeshift staging area. There were crates, sophisticated electronic monitoring gear that looked military-grade, and leading from this area into a reinforced hatch in the floor was a thick, insulated conduit, the direct line to the subterranean systems. Marcus was there. He stood over the open hatch, not looking panicked, but focused, working with quiet intensity. He was wearing gloves and a jumpsuit, and he was holding a tablet running diagnostics. He hadn't seen us yet. "Target confirmed," Davies whispered into her mic. "He's prepping the injection line. Vance, now." I took a breath, the name catching in my throat. "Marcus, stop this!" Marcus froze, his head snapping up. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked deeply annoyed, as if I were an unexpected but manageable administrative hurdle. He glanced down at the tablet, then back at me, a slow, cold smile spreading across his face. "Arthur," Marcus said, his voice calm, carrying easily in the vast space. "You really had to make this difficult. I thought planting that little cylinder would keep you quiet while I wrapped up Senator Thorne's retirement plan. Guess you got nosy." "Thorne? What is this, Marcus? What did you put in that building?" I demanded, taking an involuntary step forward. "Oh, the museum? That was just the lock," Marcus chuckled, gesturing vaguely toward the floor. "The real payload is down here. Thorne wanted to send a very clear message to the market about who controls national security contracts going forward. A little demonstration of absolute, untraceable power. And you, Arthur, were the perfect scapegoat for the initial distraction." Davies raised her weapon. "Marcus, drop the tablet and surrender. The transfer has been intercepted." Marcus's smile widened into something predatory. He didn't drop the tablet. Instead, he tapped a final command on the screen with his thumb, his eyes locked on mine with an almost pitying look. "Too late, Detective. The sequence initiated 30 seconds ago. And Arthur, my friend," Marcus said, finally turning his full attention back to the open hatch, "Thorne didn't want the dispersal unit primed in the museum. He wanted it primed here. This bunker? It's not just a staging area. It's the primary pump station for the entire city's high-pressure water main system. That cylinder wasn't an activator for a gas. It was a catalyst for a waterborne agent that Thorne has been engineering for years. Before Davies could shout the order to fire, Marcus didn't run. He didn't surrender. With a swift, practiced movement, he reached behind him, grabbed a heavy wrench left on a nearby crate, and swung it with all his force, not at an officer, but directly at the exposed conduit line leading into the hatch. The one he had just confirmed was active. There was a sickening crunch of metal, followed by an immediate, explosive sound of pressurized water blasting outward. Not just a leak, but a massive structural breach. The lights flickered violently, plunging the warehouse into near darkness, momentarily blinding us. "You fool!" Davies roared, stumbling back from the sudden torrent of icy water now engulfing the staging area. When the emergency floodlights sputtered back on a second later, the scene had changed catastrophically. The conduit was ripped open, water spraying everywhere. Marcus was gone. He hadn't used the hatch to escape. The massive rupture had created a swirling vortex of murky water where the floor had been. He had deliberately flooded the pump station, either to escape through the overwhelmed sewage tunnels or, far worse, to ensure the immediate, uncontrolled distribution of whatever nightmare agent he had just injected into the city's core infrastructure, moments before he vanished into the chaos. And now the water was rising fast. The shock of the rupture was immediate and absolute. A wall of frigid, foul-smelling water slammed into the tactical team, sweeping away smaller pieces of equipment and momentarily submerging the lower half of the staging area. The emergency lights flickered wildly, casting long, distorted shadows across the swirling brown maelstrom where the floor of the industrial bunker had been. Marcus, that cold, calculating bastard, hadn't just initiated the payload. He'd created an instant, uncontrolled flood to cover his tracks and maximize the agent's distribution. "Containment breach! Containment breach!" Davies screamed into her dead radio, wading waist-deep in the rapidly rising water, her weapon uselessly pointed at the empty space where Marcus had stood. "Evacuate! Secure the remaining equipment!" My mind, shockingly, cleared amidst the pandemonium. I wasn't focused on the tactical chaos. I was focused on the implications. Waterborne agent, city mains. If the catalyst was successfully introduced and mixed with the water supply before the EPA or CDC could isolate the vector, millions were at risk. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. This was about stopping a genuine catastrophe. I looked down at the empty space where the conduit had been torn apart. The water wasn't just flowing out of the tear. It was churning violently, meaning the primary pump pressure was still engaged, and Marcus hadn't sealed the rupture. He had created a pressure release, likely to force the agent through the system faster. "Detective, the pressure!" I yelled over the roar of the flooding. "If the pressure is still on, the agent is moving faster. We need to shut down the main valves before it reaches the main residential nexus." Davies looked at me, her eyes narrowed, calculating the sheer absurdity of taking advice from the primary suspect, yet recognizing the chilling logic. "Where are the valves for this section, Vance? You knew the environmental layout of the museum. Do you know the pressure controls for the city grid?" "No, not the grid, but I know the design philosophy." I pointed desperately toward a smaller, heavily reinforced door set into the concrete wall, separate from the main hatch. The initial consultation I did years ago included schematics for emergency shutoff points for the entire facility in case of catastrophic failure during testing phases. That door, it leads to the old manual override room. Thorne probably had Marcus activate it down here to force the distribution, but the failsafe should still be there. Davies didn't hesitate this time. She barked orders at the surviving officers to secure the equipment and began fighting the current toward the override door. I was right behind her, adrenaline overriding the instinct to flee. We reached the door, which was locked electronically. Davies slammed her shoulder against it, but the reinforced steel barely shuddered. "The lock needs a key card," she spat, checking her belt. No access. "No," I said, recognizing the panel. Thorne's crew wouldn't trust a modern keycard for a manual failsafe. It's legacy analog. Look for the manual release lever, usually hidden behind a maintenance panel. Davies immediately ripped open a thin metal service plate near the door frame. Beneath it, covered in dust and grime, was a heavy iron lever, the kind that required brute force and a good mechanical understanding to operate. "Get ready to brace," she yelled. Together, we grabbed the lever. It groaned in protest, years of disuse cementing it in place. We pulled, muscles screaming, the sound of rushing water deafening. Finally, with a screech that seemed to tear the air, the lever slammed home. The effect was instantaneous. The roaring sound of water abruptly cut off, replaced by a heavy, resonant thud echoing from deep within the earth as the massive primary valves sealed shut across the sector. The deluge subsided to a manageable, receding flow. Silence descended, broken only by the dripping of water and the ragged breathing of the officers. Davies sagged against the wall, drenched and exhausted, but alive. The immediate threat of mass contamination was averted, at least in this segment of the city grid. "It's isolated," she managed, wiping water from her eyes. "We've bought the CDC hours, maybe days, to trace the precise composition of what Marcus injected and contain the affected zones before it spreads beyond the immediate distribution pipeline." Then Davies turned to me, not with accusation, but with grim acknowledgement. "You saved this city, Vance. You helped us stop a political assassination attempt disguised as a disaster." My relief was profound, but fleeting. What about Marcus and Thorne? Davies looked back toward the gaping hole in the floor, where the water was still draining away. "Marcus is gone. He likely escaped into the sewer network or found another exit while we were focused on the valves. He knew the endgame was compromised the second we found the cylinder. As for Thorne, she walked over to the main staging area, now a muddy mess, and knelt by the diagnostic tablet Marcus had abandoned when he pulled the lever. The screen was cracked but still dimly displaying the last active window, a secure messaging thread. Davies tapped the screen gently, bringing up the final unread message Marcus had composed just before the raid. It was addressed only to A. She read it aloud, her voice steady but heavy. "The package is secured. The target has been neutralized. I have left the decoy in place for retrieval. You owe me double for the cleanup, Thorne. I will contact you via the Geneva server once the fallout stabilizes. Until then, sleep soundly." "Neutralized?" I echoed, suddenly feeling a cold dread deeper than the floodwater. Who is the target? It wasn't the Federal Reserve. That was the distraction. Davies looked up slowly, her gaze locking onto mine with sudden, terrifying comprehension. She walked back to the evidence table where the cylinder, the key, had been placed moments ago, now bagged and tagged. She picked up the bag, her expression hardening into one of pure, focused resolve. The museum was the distraction, Vance. The dispersal unit was the contingency. But the real target, the one Marcus ensured was neutralized before he initiated the water crisis to cover his retreat, it wasn't a building or a market. It was a person. She held up the small, matte black cylinder, no longer seeing it as evidence, but as the final clue in a much darker equation. We were chasing shadows of financial conspiracy and terrorism, but Marcus's final message confirms it. The real job was an assassination, and the only person who stood to gain anything immediate and permanent from a chaotic diversion that drew all law enforcement focus away from the museum while Marcus was securing the decoy package. She let the implication hang in the air, the final, horrifying piece clicking into place. "Clara," I whispered, the name feeling hollow and distant. "Clara Hayes. You said she was being held for obstruction, but if she was the target, why would Marcus frame me to protect her?" Davies stepped closer, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of approaching backup units. "Because, Arthur, Marcus didn't frame you to protect her. He framed you to get you out of the way. Clara Hayes wasn't just your fiancée. She was the chief curator at the Sterling Museum. And the decoy package Marcus secured before the flood, it wasn't money or data. It was the actual scepter of Antioch, which was never stolen in the first place. It was swapped out long ago. Marcus and Thorne needed a high-profile, traceable item, the fake scepter, to implicate you, while Marcus was securing the real one, which Clara had access to. They used you as the perfect distraction so they could eliminate the only person who knew the real scepter was missing, the person who could prove the theft was an inside job executed weeks, perhaps months, before the supposed heist. She paused, her eyes boring into mine. Clara Hayes wasn't detained for lying about your alibi, Vance. She was detained because she was the only witness to the true conspiracy, and Marcus just signaled to Thorne that the loose end is tied up.